The sun, when it dared to pierce the savannah's bruised sky, illuminated a landscape irrevocably altered. For years, Manla had been its undisputed sovereign. His roar, a deep, resonant rumble, had once been the signature of his dominion, echoing across his vast Kruger territory, a solitary force of nature, primal and absolute. His immense frame, rippling with muscle, had been forged by countless hunts and territorial battles, solidifying his claim as king. But then, the storm had come. Not merely a storm, but an unprecedented tempest of unnatural intensity, a meteorological beast that had pummeled the park for days. Rain had fallen in solid sheets, winds had roared like 1,000 tortured spirits, and lightning had cleaved the sky with furious abandon. Manla had sought shelter deep within his granite cave, a fortress against the chaos, observing the world outside being reshaped by an unholy fury. The land was now a mosaic of ravaged trees, swollen rivers, and the ghosts of familiar pathways. Days later, with the last of the storm clouds retreating, Manla emerged into the raw, sodden world. His senses, usually a finely tuned instrument of survival, were overwhelmed by a new unsettling cacophony. Amidst the expected post-storm odors of wet earth, crushed vegetation, and the faint musk of other predators, there was a complex, alien scent. It wasn't the familiar tang of wild dog, nor the scent of blood or fear. This was something acrid, chemical, and deeply fundamentally wrong. A metallic sharpness underlying a sickly sweet decay that prickled at his throat. It was the scent of contamination, a scar on the wild. Driven by an instinct he couldn't place, Manla followed the disturbing trail. It led him through a treacherous landscape of mud and fallen debris to a makeshift den beneath a tangle of storm-felled acacia. There, huddled together, were 5 African wild dog puppies: Thandi, Bongani, Sifo, Kaya, and Lethu. They were not just orphaned, they were visibly ill, unnaturally lethargic. Their usually vibrant coats dull, their small bodies racked by shivers despite the warming sun. Their eyes, typically bright with canine mischief, were glazed, unfocused. Manla's predatory instincts screamed at him. Eliminate them. They were weak, easy prey, a natural part of the cycle. Yet, something held him back. Their helplessness, their sickly state, combined with the strange, noxious odor clinging to them, triggered a primal, protective urge he'd never experienced before. It was a fierce, confusing current in the deep waters of his ancient brain. He saw not food, but vulnerability. Miles away, in the relative order of the park's ranger station, Dr. Lena Nkomo felt a similar unease. A seasoned park ranger whose life was woven into the fabric of Kruger, Lena had spent the days after the storm documenting its aftermath. But it wasn't just the physical damage. She noted an unusual spike in wildlife casualties, not just from the storm's direct impact, but animals found dead with no obvious cause, exhibiting strange physiological anomalies. Natural causes, her superiors had dismissed it, citing the unprecedented storm. But Lena knew better. These were not simply natural disruptions. Her advanced monitoring equipment, usually a dependable extension of her senses, was also registering localized, intermittent energy spikes. They pulsed faintly, then surged, then faded, always centered near Manla's known territory. The readings baffled her. No known geological activity, no meteorological phenomenon could explain them. Back at the den, Manla, torn between instinct and this nascent, protective intelligence, watched the smallest puppy, Kaya, convulse softly. A low rumble escaped his chest, not of hunger but of deep frustration. Then, with an act utterly unprecedented for a solitary king, he gently nudged Kaya with his massive nose, a touch so tender it defied his very nature. He turned his head then, his gaze fixed on the distant outline of the ranger outpost, a silent plea hanging in the humid air. Manla held that unnerving, intelligent gaze towards the direction of Lena's station, a silent, almost directive communication that transcended species. He wasn't just looking, he was sending. Lena, reviewing the anomalous energy spikes for the 10th time, felt an inexplicable pull. A cold tremor of urgency snaked up her spine, cutting through the logical framework of her professional life. Every protocol screamed against it. venturing alone into apex predator territory, especially after such a disruptive storm. But her intuition, sharp as a hunter's blade, demanded action. She grabbed her pack, her handheld scanner. Something's wrong. This isn't just a storm's aftermath, Lena muttered to herself, her voice barely a whisper as she knelt beside a peculiar dead bird near her jeep. Its feathers were pristine, but its eyes were wide open, glazed, and there was no visible injury. Her handheld device beeped weakly. Then a faint but insistent signal. It wasn't the usual GPS, but a localized field reading, guiding her unmistakably towards Manla's domain, a path she normally wouldn't have dared to take so soon after a major storm. The rhythmic beep of Lena's handheld scanner grew stronger, a persistent whisper against the vast silence of the post-storm savanna. Each step into Manla's territory felt like a trespass, a violation of an unspoken treaty. Her senses were on high alert, every rustle of dry grass, every snap of a twig, a potential threat. Then, through a screen of bent fever trees, she saw him. Mandla. He wasn't aggressively patrolling, nor was he hidden. He stood near a debris-filled gully, his immense golden form stark against the bruised landscape, his gaze fixed on her. There was no challenge in his eyes, no tightening of his muscles signaling a charge, only an unnerving intensity, an almost expectation. Lena stopped, her breath catching in her throat, her hand instinctively going to the tranquilizer dart on her belt. This was beyond improbable. Mandla, the solitary king, was not just tolerating her presence. He seemed to be waiting. He took a slow, deliberate step toward her, then turned his head, looking back towards the gully, a clear invitation. A strange, primal understanding bloomed in Lena's mind. He was leading her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but something in his steady, unblinking gaze compelled her forward. She followed, a seasoned ranger defying every ounce of her training. The debris-filled gully opened into a small, sheltered alcove, a makeshift den. Huddled within were the 5 wild dog puppies, Thandi, Bongani, Sifo, Kaya, and Lithu, whimpering faintly. Lena's breath hitched. Mandla, the legendary solitary lion, known for his relentless hunting of rival predators, including wild dogs, was their guardian. The sight was stunning, a complete shattering of the natural order. The puppies were clearly unwell, shivering uncontrollably despite the rising heat, their small bodies racked by tremors. Most unsettling were the unusual skin lesions, red and angry, peeking through their sparse fur. 1,000 protocols screamed in Lena's mind. Observe from a distance. Do not interfere with predator behavior. Never approach sick wild animals, especially with an apex predator nearby. Her career, her life, hung in the balance. But the puppy's critical state, their desperate need, and Mandla's trusting, intelligent presence overrode every logical warning. Their eyes, wide and pleading, were a silent testament to a suffering she couldn't ignore. Mandla sat back on his haunches, watching her with an intensity that communicated both trust and an undeniable urgency. A low rumble vibrated in his chest, not a threat, but something almost conversational, an ancient acknowledgement. It was a shared understanding, a silent plea that resonated deep within Lena. "This is insane, but I can't leave them," Lena whispered, her voice barely audible, her hand trembling as she took out a small, emergency medical kit from her pack. She knew she was risking everything, her reputation, her career, and quite possibly her life, by breaking every rule in the book. Carefully, slowly, Lena approached the den. Mandla remained calm, his gaze unwavering, a silent sentinel. She uncapped a rehydration solution, her movements precise. As the first few drops touched Kaya's parched tongue, a weak whimper of relief escaped the puppy. And then, from Mandla, came a sound Lena had never heard from a wild lion, a deep, vibrating purr, an unprecedented display of gratitude that vibrated through the very ground. Her initial examination revealed a host of bizarre symptoms. The puppy's heart rates were dangerously accelerated. The discolored patches on their skin weren't just lesions, they were unnaturally dark, almost necrotic in places. And the smell, the same acrid chemical odor Mandla had detected, emanated strongly from their fur. This wasn't just exposure to the elements. This was something toxic, something far more sinister. Working quickly, Lena covertly collected small fur and tissue samples from each puppy, carefully placing them into a sealed, sterile container hidden deep in her pack. She knew with chilling certainty that official labs, already predisposed to dismiss her concerns, might ignore or even intentionally misinterpret her findings if she presented them openly. This had to be her secret. As she administered more rehydration fluid, Bongani, the apparent alpha puppy, weakly lifted his head and licked her hand, a fragile, profound gesture of trust. Manla watched, a silent guardian, his eyes never leaving her, a profound understanding shimmering within their depths. "What have you been through, little ones? What is this smell?" Lena murmured, her heart aching with a blend of fear and fierce determination. She provided basic first aid and enough water to last a few hours, promising them she would return. As she rose, preparing to depart, Manla watched her go, then settled back into his vigil, his eyes holding a depth of understanding that was both terrifying and utterly, heartbreakingly human. Back at the relative safety of the outpost, the quiet hum of Lena's makeshift lab felt like a heartbeat under siege. Her hands, steady through years of fieldwork, now trembled as she ran preliminary tests on the covertly collected samples. The readings flickered across the screen, incomprehensible at first, then chillingly clear. They were off the charts, not for any known toxins or diseases, but for a bewildering cocktail of unknown synthetic compounds and genetic markers that defied any natural origin. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was far beyond a simple ecological anomaly. She tried to report her findings to Ranger HQ. The response was immediate, dismissive, and unsettling. Her detailed concerns about unusual contaminants were met with a wall of skepticism, followed by thinly veiled warnings to stick to natural causes for the post-storm casualties. A cold dread settled in her stomach. They weren't just disbelieving her, they were actively shutting her down. Undeterred, Lena retreated into the labyrinth of her own research. She began cross-referencing old park maps with recent satellite data, poring over every contour, every scrubland, every watercourse near Mandela's territory. She was searching for anomalies, disused paths, freshly cleared areas, or suspicious land leases that might hint at a clandestine presence. The vastness of the park, usually a source of solace, now felt like a sprawling canvas hiding dark secrets. Her next visit to the den revealed a new layer of astonishing complexity. Mandla, usually a creature of solitary routine, was exhibiting what could only be described as evolved protection. Lena observed him meticulously cleaning the puppies with his rough tongue, but more remarkably, he was moving them, not haphazardly, but to different, seemingly safer spots within the gully, exhibiting a complex, organized behavior. It was as if he understood the puppies were in danger, and he was actively strategizing their survival. The puppies themselves were a phenomenon. Though still bearing the lesions and signs of illness, they showed unnaturally rapid development. Their motor skills were advanced for their age, their senses acutely honed, their movements unusually coordinated. Lena watched Thandi, the smallest, deftly scale a small rock face that should have been impossible for a wild dog puppy of her size. They communicated with Mandla in complex barks and whines, a dialogue that felt ancient and profound. These aren't just wild dogs. Something's enhancing them, Lena thought, a profound unease settling over her. This wasn't just contamination. It was transformation. An increasingly chilling sense of being watched began to prickle Lena's skin. It was subtle, a prickling at the back of her neck, a shadow at the periphery of her vision. Her comms, usually crystal clear, would sometimes crackle with static in specific areas, especially when she approached Mandela's territory, as if her signals were being jammed or monitored. On one such visit, Mandela suddenly became agitated. He let out a low guttural growl, a sound of deep warning, and forcefully but gently pushed Lena away from a particular patch of overgrown bush. Investigating later after Mandela had calmed, Lena's fingers brushed against something almost invisible, a thin, taut line, a faint, nearly undetectable tripwire, expertly placed. Someone had been there, expecting her, preparing for her. The subtle threats escalated. A drone, ostensibly for wildlife monitoring, hovered far too long over Lena's vehicle as she returned to the outpost, its lens a cold, unblinking eye. Back at her computer, she found her digital files, the raw data from her initial scans, her field notes, subtly corrupted, rendering them useless, erased without a trace. But Lena was resourceful. Digging deeper into the park's network, she discovered a hidden, encrypted server log. It revealed unusual access patterns, a ghost in the machine, linked to a shell corporation registered offshore, a name she'd never heard before. The pieces clicked into place chillingly. They're watching me, and they want this buried, Lena realized, staring at the corrupted files on her laptop, the screen reflecting her pale, determined face. Meanwhile, in the depths of the savannah, Mandla, alerted by some unseen signal, perhaps the faint vibration of disturbed earth or the distant hum of unseen technology, tracked a new human scent. It led him to a remote corner of his territory, a scent that was a terrifying blend of chemicals and human fear, a predator's mark upon his land. The puppy's condition was worsening. Lena watched Thandi and Lethu, moments ago listless, now scampering with an unnatural, frantic energy, only to collapse seconds later, shivering, their small bodies convulsing. The lesions on their skin had spread, coalescing into ugly, weeping sores radiating the same acrid chemical stench. Time was running out. She made to return to her vehicle, hoping to summon help, but Mandla blocked her path. His massive head dipped, nudging her. Then he turned, a low, insistent growl vibrating in his chest, pulling her deeper into the reserve, away from the known tracks, into a dense, rarely patrolled section. Every instinct screamed at Lena to refuse, to turn back, but Mandla's gaze, brimming with urgency, was undeniable. He moved with a purpose, a guide leading her through the labyrinthine undergrowth. He would pause, an almost imperceptible shift in his weight, a subtle flick of his ear, and Lena, following his cues, would find herself stepping around cleverly concealed snares, tripwires, and pressure plates that even her seasoned eye, her years of training, might have missed. Mandla's intelligence was undeniable, a chilling revelation. He's showing me the path. He knows what these are, Lena marveled, her voice a whispered breath, stepping over a camouflage trap, guided by Mandla's low growl. This wasn't merely instinct. It was knowledge, born of observation, perhaps even experience. He was leading her through a minefield. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mandla halted. Before them stood a heavily overgrown structure, almost swallowed by the encroaching savannah. It was a research outpost, clearly not on any official park map, its dilapidated exterior a perfect camouflage. The air here was heavy, tasting metallic and unnatural, a stark contrast to the usual earthy scent of the bush. It felt like a wound on the landscape. Pushing through a broken door, Lena found herself in a scene of chaotic abandonment. Discarded equipment lay strewn about. Beakers, wiring, strange, rusted apparatus. Chemical residues stained the concrete floor, emitting a faint, sickly sweet odor. Fragmented data logs, partially burned, hinted at large-scale, unregulated bioexperiments, their vague terminology chillingly familiar. Then, Lena made the chilling discovery. Tucked beneath a broken console, a discarded, stained report. The title sent a shiver down her spine. Adaptive Predator Enhancement Trials, Phase 1. It referenced early-stage wild dog development, environmental integration challenges, and accelerated growth markers. The puppies, her puppies, they weren't just victims of contamination. They were test subjects. They experimented on them. This is an illegal biohazard, Lena whispered, her voice barely audible, her blood running cold. Her eyes fell upon a series of Polaroid photos tacked to a dusty bulletin board, images of wild dog puppies, strikingly similar to Thandi, Bongani, Saifo, Kaya, and Lethu, each marked with a small, printed serial number. The faces of her vulnerable charges stared back at her, proof of a horrific betrayal. A glint of reflected light caught her eye. Hidden surveillance cameras, strategically placed in shadowed corners, monitored the facility. They weren't broken, they were active. She wasn't just investigating a crime scene. She was in an active, observed space. The threat was immediate. As Lena frantically secured more evidence, stuffing data chips and photos into her pack, the distant growl of approaching engine sounds grew louder, cutting through the stillness. Corporate security forces. They were inbound. Manla, who had remained outside, suddenly let out a deafening roar, not of anger, but a calculated primal warning. He herded the disoriented puppies with surprising gentleness into a secure, hidden crevice within the rocks, shielding them from view. Then, with a fluid, terrifying grace, he positioned himself, his massive body a formidable golden barrier between Lena and the approaching threat. His muscles tensed, his eyes locked onto her, conveying a message as clear as any spoken word. Get what you need, Lena. I'll buy you time. Mandla seemed to communicate with his intense, focused gaze, his massive body a wall of defiance against the encroaching darkness. If you thought the last part was intense, brace yourselves. Lena and Mandla are now in a deadly race against time, confronting a conspiracy that's far more sinister than we could have imagined. Hit that like button, share this story with everyone you know, and subscribe so you don't miss a single beat of this chilling investigation. Because what Lena uncovers next, it changes everything. The growl of approaching engines rapidly escalated into the roar of heavy vehicles braking sharply. Boots crunched on the gravel outside, followed by the metallic click of weapons being readied. Armed corporate mercenaries, cold-eyed and efficient, stormed the facility. Their leader, a man whose face was chiseled from granite, moved with ruthless precision, clearly determined to destroy evidence and neutralize Lena. But Manla was ready. With a roar that vibrated through the very ground, he launched himself into a series of calculated diversions. He didn't engage in a direct, suicidal charge. Instead, he used the dense, overgrown terrain of the abandoned outpost to his advantage, feinting attacks, drawing the mercenaries into narrow corridors of foliage, separating them, always leading them away from Lena. His movements were a terrifying ballet of tactical brilliance, buying precious seconds. The puppies, Thandi, Bongani, Sifo, Kaya, and Lithu, despite their illness, displayed astonishing coordinated behavior. They darted in and out of the mercenaries' legs, nipping at ankles, distracting, creating chaos. Their enhanced senses, a chilling side effect of their ordeal, allowed them to anticipate movements, guiding Manla with urgent barks, a living, breathing shield around Lena. While Manla and the puppies engaged in this desperate ballet, Lena furiously downloaded critical files from a hidden server she'd managed to locate, the data streaming onto her encrypted drive. The more files she accessed, the clearer the horror became. This wasn't just a biohazard. This was Project Chimera, a vast, insidious program involving the genetic manipulation of apex predators for corporate interests. The files revealed the true sickening scope of the conspiracy. The superstorm that had ravaged Kruger was not just an unfortunate natural disaster. It was merely a cover. Weather manipulation data tucked within the server logs showed calculated nudges, enhancing and directing the storm. It was designed to provide the perfect chaotic backdrop for the forced relocation and accidental release of altered wildlife, including the wild dog puppies, into the wild. Their survival, their adaptation, their potential to spread the bioagent, all were to be meticulously studied. They used a natural disaster as a weapon, Lena exclaimed, her voice raw with disbelief and disgust, staring at the evidence of man-made catastrophe. Then came the final, bitter blow, the discovery of a mole within the park administration. Encrypted communications detailed a ranger providing strategic information to the corporation, explaining the immediate dismissals of her concerns, the corrupted files, the constant surveillance. She hadn't been paranoid. She'd been targeted. Amidst the chaos, Manla communicated with Lena through a shared language that defied scientific explanation. Subtle head nudges directed her to a hidden access point. Specific growls warned her of approaching danger, a profound interspecies understanding that had forged an unbreakable bond. Suddenly, the head mercenary, the granite-faced leader, burst into the server room, his weapon trained squarely on Lena. "Give us the data, Ranger," he snarled, his voice devoid of emotion, "or this lion dies, and your little mongrels, too." The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Lena's heart plummeted, but before she could react, Mandla, who had silently circled back, saw the mercenary aim. With a defiant roar, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury and sacrifice, he lunged. The mercenary fired. The crack of the shot echoed through the confined space, a sharp, terrible sound. Mandla faltered, taking a non-lethal but debilitating hit to his shoulder, a sacrifice made to protect her. Fueled by a surge of white-hot rage and despair, Lena unleashed her own training. Years of defending the park, of facing poachers in dangerous situations, now coalesced into a precise, furious burst of action. She moved with a speed that startled the mercenary, disarming him in a fluid, brutal motion. As he crumpled, Lena secured the final piece of evidence, a direct link from Project Chimera to a powerful global conglomerate, a name that made her blood run cold. In the aftermath, the puppies rushed to Mandela's side, their whimpers filling the air, nudging his wounded shoulder, their small bodies pressing against his massive frame. An unbreakable loyalty, a bond forged in fire and shared trauma, displayed with a raw emotion that moved Lena to tears. The fight was far from over. The shot had crippled Mandla, a searing pain tearing through his shoulder, but not his spirit. Lena, her heart a raw wound, knew they had precious moments. With the mercenary incapacitated, she scooped up the encrypted drive in a vital physical file, her mind racing. Escape. They had to escape the facility with the evidence and the wild dog family. The sound of more boots thudding closer meant the mercenaries were regrouping, closing in. Despite his injury, Mandla moved with a staggering determination, his low growls guiding them through dense thickets and over uneven terrain, away from the facility. The savannah, usually a silent observer, now became their shield. The puppies, too, played their part, darting ahead, their heightened senses warning of approaching danger long before Lena's could detect it, their barks and movements acting as vital scouts. Mandla's strength, his sheer will to protect his adopted family, was a testament to his enduring spirit. Lena, her breath ragged, formulated a desperate, high-risk plan. She couldn't trust official channels, the mole proved that. She needed a public platform, undeniable exposure. She guided Mandla and the puppies towards a seldom-used service road that intersected with a frequented tourist trail, a spot she knew was often buzzed by news helicopters. It was a gamble, but their only chance. The showdown was brutal. The mercenaries, led by a new, equally ruthless operative, caught up, their vehicles screeching to a halt, forming a perimeter. Lena and the wild dog family were trapped. Just as the mercenaries closed in, their weapons raised, a thunderous roar ripped through the air. Mandla emerged from the tree line, scarred, limping, but magnificent. He roared ferociously, not at the humans directly, but towards a high vantage point, the ridge where Lena knew news choppers often flew. It was a calculated, deliberate act. He's creating a spectacle, a distraction, Lena realized, a surge of adrenaline sharpening her focus. She fumbled in her pack, her fingers closing around a signal flare. This was it. With a defiant shout, Lena ignited the flare, its brilliant red plume scorching the pale sky. Above, the distant thrumming of rotor blades grew louder, closer. The mercenary leader swore, his face a mask of fury. The news helicopter, drawn by the roaring lion and the stark red flare, banked sharply, its camera lenses undoubtedly zooming in on the unfolding scene. The armed men, the ranger, the injured lion, and the pack of sick wild dog puppies. The illegal operation was being exposed live on air. The mercenaries, caught in the blinding glare of public scrutiny, were forced to back down, their mission compromised. The aftermath was swift and brutal for the corporation. Their illegal activities, meticulously detailed in Lena's files, were revealed to a shocked world. Global outrage ensued, sparking investigations and protests across continents. Lena became a reluctant whistleblower, facing immense political and personal backlash, but also a tidal wave of support from conservationists and the public. The puppies, Thandi, Bongani, Saifo, Kaya, and Lethu, now recovering and stronger, displayed their remarkable intelligence and social cohesion, living proof of Project Chimera's success. Albeit through the most unethical of means, they became symbols of hope and warning, a living legacy of what science could achieve and what it must never become. Mandla, scarred but alive, his legend growing, was revered. His unprecedented intelligence, his alliance with Lena, and his ultimate sacrifice reshaped conservation efforts, sparking new studies into interspecies communication and animal consciousness. Lena was offered a high-profile position, a comfortable office job far from the dangers of the bush. She declined. She chose to stay in the field, dedicating her life to protecting wildlife from human exploitation, forever changed by the lion and his extraordinary family. They taught me that true power isn't dominance, but protection. And some secrets refuse to stay buried. Lena narrated, her voice carrying the quiet wisdom of experience, watching Manla and the now thriving wild dog pack from a distance, a testament to an impossible bond in a world forever altered.